Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing that's happening and what some of your predictions will be for the next 5 years.
The first thing I would say is be really suspicious of anybody out there who's making predictions about where AI is going.
When tech companies make massive changes to their tech stacks, do you ever wonder who makes that decision and why? I sat down with the brilliant Cormac Twomey, the former CTO of OpenTable and former director of eHarmony, where we talked about his career journey from being a software engineer to becoming the CTO of one of the most successful tech companies in the industry, and the difficult decisions he had to make along the way, both technical and people decisions. We also talked some AI just to scratch your itch. Let's dive in. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Tech Leaders Playbook. I'm extremely excited about today's guest, Cormac. I've known Cormac Twomey for about, I would say, 13 years, Cormac?
Something like that. Yeah, about 13 years.
13 years. Cormac was a client of mine, and he was introduced by a friend of ours, Carlos Moreno, who told me at the time, I'm going to introduce you to someone amazing. I thought that was awesome, and Cormac and I hit it off. And since then, we've remained as buddies, and I'm thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for being here, Cormac.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to be here. So looking forward to the chat.
Thanks for taking the leap of faith. I know we did zero preparation. We just kind of showed up like friends would, and to have a good conversation. So I'd love to start with just your story, your journey. A cool thing about Cormac is he's been programming since he was 8, and even though he was a CTO of a organization, a publicly traded company, OpenTable, which was part of a publicly traded company, and managed, I believe, 400 engineers.
Yeah, that's right.
If I remember correctly, you still code. You're still very technical and hands-on.
Well, I don't get me wrong. I like to code occasionally. I have written approximately 0 lines of production code at OpenTable. So I try to keep my coding activities now for kind of social purposes or, on the side. I'm not a big believer in the CTO or head of engineering, rolling up their sleeves and taking, production coding responsibilities. Probably best to leave it up to the people who are doing that full time.
Smart. You've been programming since you were 8. How does that, maybe the journey starts there? Tell me your story. How did that happen? How did you get to where you're at today?
It's funny. First of all, I have my older brother to thank for having twisted my mother's arm to get us a Commodore VIC-20, which I think was right around 1980. And we got that into the house. My mom really wasn't sure, is this like, articles were already showing up about things that just suck kids further into screen time. And she chatted to a friend who was in a computer science faculty in Dublin, where I'm from. And he said, just buy a couple of games, give the kids a bit of fun through the Christmas holidays. But they'll get bored of the games pretty quickly. And one of the nice things about the old simple computers that you could get at the time was that right out of the box, the computer came with a programming manual. Oh. And so, you turn on the computer, there's a prompt right there. Just loading to play a game is actually a command you have to enter. You load from tape, and that would, load up your game. So pretty quickly that played out. And, we played these couple of games, simple games. They were a lot of fun, very addictive, but it only takes you so far. And I started looking at a little bit more at this basic programming manual. And, it's funny. I have chats with my son sometimes about this, and my older son, that I almost feel like I had an advantage growing up, sort of like becoming aware of computers in 1980. Because if I got my name printing on the screen, and then got it printing, 10 times and then moving left to right or something, I felt like a programming genius, and meanwhile, we're growing up in Silicon Valley, and, there was 3 or 4 years ago, there was a computer day where people were showing off some computer stuff. And as a guest speaker to introduce the session, the guest speaker was somebody who had a hand in inventing TCP/IP. I can't remember the name of the guy, but a very prominent name, and I almost feel like it was an advantage that I had, that there was nobody around me at the time who was just rocking the world of computer science. And so if I could get my name moving across the screen, I felt like a genius, and that gave me the encouragement to keep moving forward. Whereas I see a lot of younger kids now who will do something amazing on the computer, and then they'll turn around and say, "Oh, I'm no good at computers. I don't know what I'm doing." The bar just seems so impossibly high. So there's something to be said for keeping the bar low, keep your enjoyment high, and that certainly fueled me through my teenage years. I just loved coding. It was like solving crossword puzzles on the fly, and
Nice.
getting some sort of nicer result than a crossword puzzle being done.
And then did you go off to college eventually later and study computer science?
That's right. Yeah, I decided. I don't know. I think I decided when I was 11 that this is really what I wanted to do. When I learned that you could get paid for this stuff, and
Nice.
yeah, I studied computer science at a university in Dublin, Dublin City University, um, and as it happens, the head of the department of computer science there was my mom's friend from back in the day. That had nothing to do with me getting in. It was the Irish admission system is very cut and dry. You have SATs, the equivalent of SATs at the end of your school years, at the end of your senior year, and whatever you get in those exams determines your future. Uh, in terms of the scores you get, the grades you get, that tells you did you get into the course you want to take. Anyway, so I got into DCU and did computer science there, and just loved it.
And then I'm guessing you started in tech in some kind of software engineering role, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, so when I was one of the things about doing computer science in DCU is that they're very focused towards internships at that university, and so the year breaks early in your junior year, and so I had a 6 month internship, and I was lucky enough to get a job offer from a company in Santa Monica, not a company that exists today. It was called Quarterdeck, but they were doing some cool stuff at the time, and I went over. Me and a buddy, just two of us from DCU, went over and had an amazing summer living on Venice Beach and going to work every day. It was such a great start into the career. Getting paid to do something fun. It felt to me like the rest of the department, the engineering department at Quarterdeck, they were just geniuses, and just learning a mountain of information from the folks there. It actually, I mean, to change gears for a second, when I look at post COVID now and everybody's um, working from home is great. By the way, in my experience, a good team of engineers is not going to work slowly when they're working from home. If anything, output goes up. It certainly is no worse. But there is one piece that feels like it's missing. That environment I was in when I was a junior engineer, both when I was interning, but also as a new graduate. I was lucky enough that this company gave me a full-time job offer for when I graduated, which I accepted gladly. And that environment I was in, in 1995, I was kind of 1 year on the job, and I had the opportunity to take the lead on a back end piece of software, which I was super excited about. One day, I was literally over the water cooler, like so classic water cooler conversation, and another engineer who I just sort of knew to see in the department was in there, and he just asked me about this project and how's it going, and I was full of enthusiasm, and he asked me how what I was doing to handle a high degree of concurrency. And I proudly declared that, I had a separate thread for every incoming request. This is the best way to go. And he said to me, like, "Are you sure that's the best way to go?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, totally. This is the way to do it." And he just looked at me and he said, "It's interesting you think that." And then he left the kitchen. And that comment just got under my skin. And this was 1995, was before Google. It was before Alta Vista even. And so, I'd go into the library, the set of books that we had in work, and I'm looking through stuff. I'm reading up. It was in Windows NT. I was looking up Windows NT, and I was learning all kinds of things. And I realized there were smarter ways to go, just because that engineer had said, "Interesting, you think that," and left the kitchen. It's everybody I know who is a strong engineer now, who has decade plus of experience. They all, when I ask them about their early days of their career, there's always some interactions with other engineers that gave them an input that they didn't have. And that's one thing so I worry about in the post-COVID days. Let's make sure we're maintaining that type of atmosphere.
I agree completely, Cormac. That seems like an invaluable piece of knowledge that you got from a potential mentor early on in your career that you would not have otherwise. I highly doubt he would have slacked you this. Obviously, there was no Slack
Right.
at the time. I highly doubt he would have taken the time to meet with you on an email or on some kind of video meeting. And that's, I agree with you 100%. It's missing. It's missing, especially with young folks. I think if you're a 20-year veteran and you've been programming for 20 years and you have a great setup and you're disciplined and focused, you probably can get a lot more done at home. I agree, especially in programming, right? In certain industries, it's not as easy to be productive, I think, remotely. But I think who's the people missing out the most are the young people. And what I'm realizing, it's the young people that are demanding the remote work, and I genuinely believe it's hurting them. I see more and more folks that want to get out of the house and at least work in an office 2-3 days a week,
Yeah.
just so you can get that camaraderie back. That get out of the house, it's healthy mentally. So I'm glad you said that, because it's become almost odd to ask people to work in an office. And I think it's really hurting young folks, young engineers, young salespeople, recruiters, business people. I think it's really hurting us.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. I think 2 to 3 days a week feels like a great sweet spot to me. You're getting that different dynamic. You're getting a little bit of sort of the unofficial information share environment in an office. You're still holding on to a great deal of flexibility in your work schedule if you're spending approximately half the time working from home. So that's certainly my sweet spot. I think pushing people into the office 5 days a week is, personally, I think it's overkill. I think let's respect that everybody seems to be working happily from home. They're working productively from home. I think if you have a team that's not working productively from home, there's a bunch of other things that's going wrong with that environment. It's not that people are lazy. I think when people feel challenged and they're set up for success, in my experiences, people respond to that and they lean into it.
Agreed. Very, very good segue into where we're at next. So at eHarmony, I remember you had your team on site.
Yeah.
Everybody. I remember the Pasadena office, the Santa Monica office. How did you go about keeping people engaged? How did you go about accomplishing massive projects while maintaining what other people wanted to accomplish? Because the individual has their own career goals. The leader, like yourself, at the time, I think you were a director of engineering.
Right.
You had your own goals and the company goals. So how did you align those three things together? Their goals, your goals, and the company's goals?
I look at myself, first and foremost, I'm a technologist. I'm an engineer's engineer. By default, I'm going to admire great technical work. I'm going to coach technically. So that sort of comes without effort to me. So having said that, knowing that essentially is part of the day-to-day conversation regardless, I spend a lot of time emphasizing the focus that we exist to deliver business value to our customers. And we are going to day-to-day evaluate our success based on meeting customer goals. And so what you're trying to do is deliver, you're trying to delight your customer with a certain velocity. How quickly can you deliver new initiatives and new functionality that's going to delight your customer? Now, I think everybody can agree on that's valuable, trying to do that as quickly as possible. But over what time horizon are you measuring velocity? If you tell me that, look, I need this widget built in the next 2 weeks, otherwise the company's going under. Well, in that situation, there's clearly there's an existential threat that we have to rise to that occasion. And when there's an extreme time pressure, we are going to sacrifice every engineering standard in order to meet that goal, to say, if you need something in record time, we can deliver it. It's not going to be pretty, but we can deliver it. If you keep doing that from 2 weeks to the next 2 weeks, the following 2 weeks, you're going to end up creating so much thrash in your code base that you will be sprinting through tar pretty soon. And, you can be the biggest genius in the world, greatest engineer ever, but if you're sprinting through tar, you will tire out very quickly. So, and we'll all be going slowly. And so while we keep the North Star as delivering customer value as quickly as possible, I like to have a time horizon that's measured in the 12 to 18 month period, something around that, which is to say, we're trying to deliver functionality at velocity. Every month, we're pushing out new functionality to our customers. But I want to feel in the back of my mind that the stuff we're doing is going to result in 12 months from now, 18 months from now, we'll be going even faster than this. I always want to tell me that in the back of my mind. It still allows for an occasional 2-week period where we have to throw our hands in the air and say, "This, we need to do this thing, get it done right now." But if we're keeping that 12-month time horizon in the back of our heads, then as soon as you've delivered that feature, you've risen to the occasion, and you've made something happen, you need to say, "Okay, let's be honest with ourselves. We broke a few rules here. We've created a few bad patterns. We went around some of our design principles or our APIs structure. Let's get that fixed and get the right pieces in place so that this is going to be sustainable."
And this is why you're in the position you're in. I always remember you were a realist, but you were how do I say this? You were really, really focused on great code and great standards and great operating. That's why when you used to hire engineers, you went about it very differently than the norm. Cormac, can I guess that the statement you made about people just kind of throwing spaghetti code every 2 weeks, just releasing, is this how technical debt comes to be? Because it's a very common thing.
Technical debt is greater when you are throwing a lot of code as quickly as you can, as frequently as you can. Then technical debt builds up very quickly. But every single engineering team in the world has technical debt. Okay, so you can have the greatest engineering team. You're still going to have technical debt, because what is the definition of technical debt? Is there anything that I can point to in my code base that if I change that thing, it might speed us up a bit more? The answer to that question is always yes. There's always something that you could do to speed up. Now, is it always worth investing the energy in optimizing that? At some point, the answer becomes no, or it becomes less frequently. If you are a team that is staying on top of the stuff that's really holding you back, then you end up you get to a point where you're spending a lower percentage of your time fixing technical debt.
Nice. Cormac, you go into a company and they told you all the right things, but the first thing that they tell you is we got to get this out in the next 2 to 4 weeks. And you've got your standards. You've been very communicative about the fact that you don't throw out spaghetti code, and it's all about long-term scalability and documentation and clean code. How do you deal with something like that? Because we have a lot of CTOs that go into startups and they might not be around in 12 to 18 months. They're not worrying about 12 to 18 months. How do you deal with that?
I don't believe I said I don't put out spaghetti code. If there is because my first answer to that question, we've got to get this thing out within this month. My first question is why? Okay. And if you have a convincing answer as to why, then come hell or high water, if it's humanly possible, we'll get that done. But we'll get it done, and then we will keep in mind the rules we broke or the mess we created, and we will get that cleaned up. Earlier in my career, I've been really lucky working with some brilliant people over the years. I worked for a startup that was called Trivita back in the 90s. Brad Allen was the CTO, who's a very close friend to this day and just an amazing technologist. And we created a data prediction engine. And in the early days, after the 3 founders, I think we were just in the very early days, we were a total of 5 people, including the 3 founders, and I was one of the 2 engineers. And we had the guts of this data engine built, and what was important was this backend system. And back in 1990, this was 97, I think, there wasn't a lot of, if you wanted to hook up a remote API to be able to talk to this thing, then you kind of had to build the plumbing yourself. And so, we invested in that. I built some plumbing, got a command line interface hooked up to it so that we could control this data engine. And but we had a meeting with the investors 2 days later, and Brad could appreciate that this thing was all controllable from the command line, and that's fine. We could see the strength of the engine working there. But if you're going to show that to entrepreneurs, to investors, they need to see something a little bit more visual than, I think, bringing up a command line and seeing some numbers spit out on the screen. So in 48 hours, I created a UI for this application. Now, some UX designers would no doubt probably poke holes in some of the visualizations I had, but in 48 hours, I got a UI created that had the right charts and widgets and predictions done visually in a way that you could then present at an investor meeting, so that the right next milestone was hit for the company in order to close that next round of funding, so that we could go beyond being a 5-person company. So that's an example of, you might want to build it right, but if you build it right and it takes 2 weeks instead of 2 days, then you've failed. So sometimes there are real reasons why you have to get things done. And I am not going to be so precious about living by engineering standards every single day to say that, no, I'm not going to give the business what it needs in a 3 to 4 week period, or whatever that time period might be. But you can bet after the fact that after creating a 2-day UI, we kind of went back and did a little bit of redo work after that, right? Because if you don't, you are going to create a mess and you will slow yourselves down.
Cormac, how do you, it's an interesting follow-up question to that. We all, and I know you do, we all love giving our teams good work-life balance, right? We want them to be with their families. I know you've got a beautiful family. I think when I met you, your wife was carrying your baby at the time, which I'm guessing, based on my math, it was your youngest, who's probably 13 now.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Because that's what we met. We met around probably 2000 or 2000, God, what year was it? 2009, 10?
It was probably 2009. Well, 2010 would have been when my second guy was born. So maybe it was 2010.
There it is. Yeah. So you have a family. I have a family. A lot of folks that we manage have families, or frankly, they don't, but we still want to give them that balance. However, like you said, certain times the business needs more output. The business needs more velocity. How do you balance those things out? Because I know you're a really caring leader, but you're also very, very about getting your work done and getting your business right and helping your company achieve its goals. How do you deal with that?
I think in a healthy environment, it begins with, right from the CEO downwards, it begins with a very clear vision about what the company's objectives are. Too often you see frequently changing priorities. That's just going to create trash. If you can avoid that, if you can structure things in a way that from one quarter to the next, there's a clear sense of priorities, then I can turn around to my teams, set clear expectations. And when things are going right, people don't need to work weekends and all of that. However, every now and again, there's a surprise and something ends up being more complicated than it was, or a complication arose that was unexpected, or whatever the factor is. We now need to deliver this urgently. And so I like to leave it to the teams to figure out, the how. But when I look at my organization, if teams are working in this, I got to sacrifice my personal time, my family time, weekends, things like this. If that happens more than once a year, then things are very broken. And we try and lean in and do something about that. Because in my experience, engineers will respond if you need people to work late, work long hours, they will respond. However, their lives will become miserable. And that's going to result in, even speaking completely selfishly, as somebody looking out for business value, your product output will suffer. Not to mention, your engineers will at some point say, I'm going to go work somewhere else, somewhere that treats me better. So we try to maintain a pretty reasonable balance. And in practice, maybe once a year, there's a time when people are stepping up and working a little bit harder. But if it's happening every other month, then something we need to lean in and fix that situation.
That's great. Thank you for that. Cormac, I remember, if I can quote you from 13 years ago, you always loved meaty technical challenges. You always talked about, I want to solve crunchy, meaty problems, but only if it solves real world problems, right? So as a leader, what do you look for when you're evaluating this? Let's say you're evaluating a startup you're going to join, although you're well beyond those years, but any role, how do you how do you measure the crunchiness of the technical problems, but to make sure that there's real world problems that need to be solved, which is what startups are trying to constantly do?
Yeah. So I will say my personal outlook has changed a bit since then. In that my role back at eHarmony, I was very directly technically involved in the challenge and the solution, and it was amazing working with that team. Some of whom I've still been working with in very recent years, which has been awesome. Um, but we were solving a problem that had a very obvious importance to the end user. Uh, I don't think there are many jobs that are out there where you can say, thanks to the work I did, there are more babies in the world. Um, the work we did at eHarmony at the time resulted in with absolutely zero reduction in the quality of the compatibility standards that eHarmony made itself famous for back in those days. We were able to increase the quality of our matches so that communication rates per match went up by 30%, which was huge. In other words, more people were talking to more people, which of course was leading to more long-term relationships. And that's something that was really satisfying. As time has gone on, my particular motivation has been to find interesting business challenges and applying technology to an interesting business challenge. I'm not particularly, you could offer me some new gig leading technology at the biggest, say, e-commerce operation in the world. That wouldn't necessarily interest me because it's a very solved problem. So I'm interested in teams leaning into a problem that, if they solve it properly, is going to put a smile on the end user's face. At OpenTable, working closely with restaurants was amazing. When we were doing our job right and getting building software correctly, we were making it easier for restaurants to deliver hospitality to their customers, which is the reason they're in business. Okay, I don't think many people have started a restaurant business saying this is going to be the easiest way to make a buck. Every restaurateur has a vision for hospitality of some kind that they are trying to realize. And one thing I've learned while working at OpenTable and working really closely with a lot of restaurateurs is the technology landscape is a nightmare for restaurants. Not the individual pieces of software per se. I think we've done an amazing job at OpenTable in working towards solving that problem. But there's a lot of restaurants that have maybe 25, 30 different software systems that power their restaurant business. And restaurants in general don't hire technologists to run their restaurant. They hire people who know restaurants. They know the back of house. They know the front of house. They know how to deliver hospitality. And there's this spider's web of technologies they need to lean on in order to realize their dreams. An obvious question is, well, they don't really need to run 25, 30 pieces of software. Well, the answer is, yeah, they do, because those systems do exist for a reason, and they do increase the productivity of the restaurant. They, by having software systems to manage your staff rotations, to manage your food supplies, your revenue, your front of house, and so on, your point of sales, of course. It all will take aspects of the business out of the day-to-day and will help you focus on the business of hospitality. But keeping 25 systems, software systems talking to each other successfully is not a trivial matter. And that's something that I think there's a huge opportunity there in the restaurant industry to deliver a more seamless platform for restaurants. But it has been a joy, though, working close to restaurants and working towards solving problems like that for them has been, and when we can be successful there, it's extremely satisfying, because it's a very real world indication that the software you're creating is making life easier for other people's day-to-day business.
Especially, I mean, you forget about the restaurant side. How about the consumer side? As a consumer, I'm big on using OpenTable because I know I could book it in seconds and don't have to call the restaurant to ask a bunch of questions and things like that. I wish more restaurants used the OpenTable platform because I found it extremely easy and enjoyable to use. So I've always been a OpenTable fan.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. I mean, that's something certainly that originally, so it was the built the company identity, was the ability to do this online. Is It's a personal productivity boost. If you can remember back to the days before online reservations, it can be extremely tiresome. If you're trying to look for dinner on a Friday night at 7 p.m., how many phone calls do you need to make before you have the right reservation in your hands? So it's a big productivity boost for the individual as well.
Cormac, let's talk a little bit about technology stacks. I know you're a technologist. To you, probably language is just another means to solving a problem. eHarmony was a Java shop, if I remember correctly. And then OpenTable, when you joined, as I believe you joined as a VP and then became a CTO, was a .NET shop, I believe. So
That's right.
I don't know how much legacy you had to deal with, but tell me about your favorite tech stacks that drive you crazy, and what are the crunchiest problems when dealing with legacy code or legacy platforms?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. When I started at OpenTable, it was all .NET, and .NET, by the way, C Sharp, the language that's primarily most popular on .NET, is a really good language. It's Java in the years it has been evolving has sort of got to a point where it's syntactically, pretty much as nice as C Sharp. But C Sharp has always, I think, had the lead on Java in terms of it just being slightly more elegant language. But
Really?
back in the
I'm surprised to hear that.
yeah, I mean, I think just when you put them up side by side, C Sharp code is just a little more condensed, easier to read, and nicer to code. Unfortunately, though, back in the day, C Sharp was only a Windows platform, and that's really, I think, what made it unpopular. And certainly back in 2012, when I started at OpenTable, engineers were self-selecting themselves away from C Sharp. So it was really challenging to hire great engineers into a C Sharp environment. Now, credit to Microsoft, C Sharp is not in the same place today. C Sharp is now a platform that's available on a Mac, on Linux, across the board. You can safely run C Sharp in the data center without requiring that all your boxes are running Windows. So that's something that I think there's a growing support for C Sharp today. But at OpenTable, we started a journey of creating split backend between Java and C Sharp. Java's not the sexiest of languages, I'm pretty aware, but it definitely gets the job done. And as much as I like playing with challenging technologies, I don't like to have the technology footprint that is the day-to-day at a company shouldn't be too esoteric. So I'm not a big fan of making big investments in the more cutting edge languages, whether it's Rust or back in the day was Ruby, which Ruby now is a little bit on the downhill. And that's the problem you create for yourselves when you're making too aggressive a bet on the next generation of platforms. Java was a big language back in 2012, and it's still a big language today.
Still it is. Still is. Yeah.
And when you're trying to create a stack that can be maintainable, I believe in the value of making boring decisions. So you would definitely want to limit your technical experiments to just a few.
Well, one of the challenges that we faced partnering together, right? Because Cormac was nice enough to bring us in to recruit for OpenTable at the time, was you wanted the best engineers in the world. But there was a challenge with that. The best engineers in the world did not want to do C Sharp. And at the time, there was no .NET Core, there was no open source Microsoft. So it really created well, what are we going to do? And I think that's where you went with the Java mindset, and we were able to hire some incredible engineers who were willing to deal with some of the Microsoft legacy, applications, while building most things in Java, most new things in Java. Cormac, the one of the more kind of sexy up and coming programming languages that's been around for a long time, but really didn't have mass popularity is Golang. How do you feel about Golang? Have you looked into it? What are your thoughts?
I think Go is a great platform. I think that a company like OpenTable has limited need for Go. The important, at least for the product engineering teams, the important thing is create readable, maintainable business logic, something that people can jump into and alter and refactor, etc. There's a greater value to us keeping it in a language platform like Java than there is in Go. I think Go, though, is amazing as a replacement for classic low-level languages, C and C++ and so forth. It is terrific. And some organizations, I think, have there's a very defensible need for Go when you've got core systems where you're trying to create, very tight performance, and you're interacting with, systems at a slightly lower level. I think Go can be terrific. So, sometimes an operations team might have a good use for Go, for example, but it's certainly not something that we, really introduced into the kind of production stack, the business software stack.
Cormac, if you started a company tomorrow, I know it's a tough question to answer because it depends on the what you're trying to accomplish. But if you had to choose any programming language or any tech stack, what would it be and why?
Well, that's an interesting question. My head is not in that space right now. I'm not planning on starting my own business, but nonetheless, I think there are a number of perfectly fine answers to that question. I could say backend in Java, front end in JavaScript. C# is actually a fine choice as well. You can build backend in Python, which is not the most efficient way to build software, but I'm more interested in engineers who can move quickly than squeezing every last drop out of CPU juice from a server. I think it's a fine trade-off to make to say, we're spending 30% more on our server costs on our runtime, but our engineers are happy and they're moving together well. What's most important is that you don't create a very heterogeneous stack with, one piece running in one language, another piece running in another language, and another piece running in a third and fourth language. That's a mess. But I do believe in not getting too experimental with languages there. So I'd be looking at C#, Java, or Python probably for the back end, and I think JavaScript for the front end. I don't like JavaScript. It's a messy language. Broke every, I think, language design rule in its creation, but it is universal on the front end. It's the one language that runs in every web browser, and with Node and React. And there's a number of other, great front end frameworks that I think it's a pretty good matchup for the web stack.
Wow, what's your least favorite programming language?
Well, I'm coding up some assembly language with my son at the moment. Ooh. And on an old 1980s CPU, which is a lot of fun, but also infuriating as well. But okay, calling that's a bit of a non-answer. The only language that I've really tried to grapple with that I just hated in my career was Perl. And
I bet.
And I realized I know there's close friends of mine that would hate me saying that, because Perl had, back in the 90s, Perl had some ardent followers, but I really don't like that in Perl there's always several ways of doing the exact same thing. And there's if you get 10 Perl programmers and you line them up and say, just write a little piece of code that sorts the list of numbers or something, you'll get 10 totally different looking pieces of code. And When there's so much room for so much variability, it's very hard to create a large software system that has a lot of design integrity. And I certainly don't want to work in an environment where you've got to be the police force of maintaining certain syntax style and whatnot. That's kind of what I like about Java, in that it's kind of a boring language. And, it, you know, assuming you're just following some basic coding maxims, it's going to be readable by the rest of your Java colleagues. So yeah, Perl was probably my least favorite language.
Cormac, would you believe I spoke to a really good engineer a week ago, and he currently programs in Perl as the company's main backend application language?
I would believe that.
Wow.
I would feel sorry for that individual and for that company, but I would believe that. I do know of some of myself.
I was shocked. Cormac, tough question. Who inspires you? Whether it's an actual individual you worked with, or it's someone that you look up to in the industry that you're kind of following and in their footsteps, or watching what they do.
I get inspiration from, I think, a lot of different sources. I would get inspiration on, a weekly basis from somebody I worked with. In my management style, I delegate a lot, but I spend a lot of time interfacing with engineers, and trying to encourage a flat communication culture where anybody can talk to anybody within the product development organization. And one of the ways the way I would cheat towards staying closely connected to the architecture and the active problems that are affecting the engineering organization while delegating a lot, is I would pay a great deal of attention to incident management, how incidents were happening, how they were being followed up on, how the postmortems were going afterwards, what the learning lessons were from those. And that would also create, openings for me. I'd occasionally reach out to engineers and talk it through. And the number of times I would get a little moment's inspiration from those conversations, I think, is just super, super frequent. Over the years, I've used Twitter quite a lot as well to be able to just follow individuals within the tech space. They being able to follow certain individuals, it's like a shortcut, just keeping on top of the technology ecosystem and evolving with that. It's been interesting over recent years. Twitter, I tried to just use Twitter, like I say, as this technical tool. It got more and more political 2015, 2016 through recent years, but I still find it super useful to keep on top of technologists and try and keep up with what people are discovering. Yeah, I'm not going to call out a single individual, I don't think, that's
Fair enough.
out in the public space.
Fair enough. I think the world will explode if I don't ask CTO about current trends, specifically in AI. So let's get into that. How do you kind of keep up with current trends? And the current trend seems to be AI. AI is clearly changing the world. You and I knew that 10 years ago, right? It's just taking off 10x.
We didn't know it exactly in this way. I think it's fair to say.
Of course not. At the time, I think you all were a very data-driven culture. And so obviously that bleeds into AI. But tell me a little bit about what you're seeing that's happening and what some of your predictions will be for the next 5 years.
The first thing I would say is be really suspicious of anybody out there who's making predictions about where AI is going. Last year, was it in November that ChatGPT was released to the public? It was sometime around that, anyway, in the fall of last year. And OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, they created it internally. They didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know there was any business there, and they kind of shrugged their shoulders and they were like, "Well, let's just release it to the public and whatever, and we'll move on." So, if anybody was able to predict where AI was going, I would point my finger at those guys, right? They were at the forefront of what we're all reacting to now, and they couldn't quite see where this was all going. So, if they can't, I think a lot of the pundits that are out there, they're going to, we're all figuring this out as we go. That said, I think there is only one option for us in the in the near future, which is we should be leaning into this technology. Just looking at how this is affecting software engineering, my immediate domain, it is the tools that exist today are already clear productivity boosters. Companies that are properly using the ChatGPT and the tools based on those technologies that are already available to engineers, like Copilot and other tools, that is already easily a 20% productivity boost per engineer. And look at tools like Copilot; they cost $20 a month. They're so cheap that we need to be leaning into that. If you're not leaning into that, then you are going to get left behind. I do think it is critical for the philosophers of the world and politicians and others to think about where this stuff is going. The existential threats and the Terminator types of conversations where people talk about a future run by AI is those are important conversations to have. But if we react to what's available today by saying, by introducing restrictions on how we use today's generation of technology for productivity boosts, we will fall behind relative to other countries that do not make those same decisions. This is a huge productivity boost. I was listening to an interview with Geoffrey Hinton recently, who was kind of like, some people say the godfather of generative AI, but he's certainly been working with generative AI probably longer than anyone. And he recently left Google, and he's been raising concerns about where this stuff is going. And he's describing the current generation of tools as an idiot savant, right? And I think that's a pretty good label. The generative AI technologies that exist today are really, really bad, like really impressively bad at giving you truth, right? So don't trust the generative AI systems to generate truth for you. Some lazy lawyer out there found out the hard way, I think, and let ChatGPT generate his legal arguments for him, and
how did that work out?
Yeah, it didn't work out too well because it created it cited all kinds of previous cases that didn't exist, and it was just riddled with lies. So if you think ChatGPT is going to allow you to sit back and turn off your brain, you're very mistaken. In this generation of tools, you're very mistaken, and that's going to be the case for a while. ChatGPT 4.5 or whatever the next version will be is not going to suddenly fix that. There's an architectural aspect to this, and figuring out what truth is a very, very hard problem. So that's not something that's going to change. I'm not going to say 5 years. I wouldn't dare make a prediction that is as far out as 5 years from now in this rapidly moving space. But certainly over the next, I'd say, 18 months, this is not what you want to use ChatGPT for. However, there are a lot of tasks in, I think, pretty much every domain, but certainly in my domain, in software engineering, there are a lot of tasks that are more humdrum than others. If I'm creating a piece of software, if I'm following good programming practices and I'm creating compact individual pieces of code, like I've got a software interface and I've got a little class that's powering that interface, I can show that to tools like ChatGPT and say, hey, create the unit tests for me, right?
Sure.
Hopefully everybody is creating unit tests for their code these days. ChatGPT is not going to be a replacement for your brain. When you want to create some clever tests, you probably have to roll up your sleeves a bit still. But 80% of the tests that you're creating when you're creating unit tests are very straightforward. And that's just an example of ChatGPT can blast out a lot of tests for you. Tools are coming along. I've spoken to a number of people who are working on these tools that are going to tell you very soon where your security vulnerabilities are in your code, right? There's the OWASP top 10, which is the top 10 most common coding patterns, essentially bugs in your code that allow hackers access to your stack, right? Avenues to enter your platform. And if if I could somehow have a tool tell me, look, this is where all your OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities are in your code, that would be incredible. To be able to, and this is even before you have a robot that can say, go fix them for me. But if a team could just point themselves and say, oh, look, there's 3 OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities we didn't know we had. Let's go fix them now. That would be incredible. And that's a productivity boost. It's also a
happiness boost for people that hate doing this kind of stuff.
But you can imagine the productivity loss you get when you don't fix those problems and you get a nasty hack a year later or 9 months later or whatever, where some attackers get into your platform, your business suffers. By the way, if the attack is bad enough, your business gets destroyed overnight. I would rather have my data center blow up than have a really bad hack of my platform, because you've lost all trust with your users when that happens. And it's very hard to recover from that.
Let's fast forward 5 years, right? So companies are dealing with a lot of challenges, as many great discipline focused that people that are out there that work really hard remotely. There are as many stories of folks quite quitting, not working, people haven't turned on their computers in 3-4 weeks, and so on and so forth. That combined with people don't want to work in an office, salaries are highest ever, even in the layoffs, and companies are reacting to that by having massive layoffs. It's a correction, right? They overhired, overpaid. 6 out of 10 companies said they will have a layoff or have had a layoff in 2023. Combined 2023 and 2022, we've had 250,000 of layoffs just in the US from just big tech companies. If it might be more than that by now. So companies want efficiency. Financially and from what they produce out there. And on the flip side, most of the folks want to work less and live more, right? How are we going to balance, as leaders, how are we going to balance the needs of people and working and to employ people? And there's young and upcoming computer scientists that are graduating and may not be needed. I'm guessing manual QA engineers are no longer needed, right? Automation engineers soon could be not as needed. So how do you balance both sides? If you don't go with the flow and go and utilize AI, you're going to be a dinosaur and die off. If you're full on with it, we already know what's going to happen. How do you deal with those two things?
I don't know what's going to happen. I do think that companies are going to become much more productive with their teams, which is great. But does that mean there's going to be lots of layoffs? Will some companies lay off engineers? Yes. But how will that balance out? Will that mean there's going to be a lower demand for engineers as we go forward? My suspicion is that the answer to that is no. There is going to be more this technology, I think, is going to create more opportunities for engineering in more places, software engineering in more places. By lowering the barrier to entry to software, as you just said, Avitas, software engineering is more expensive than it ever has been. The market is telling us that there is demand for this. Yes, if you're one of the engineers who is out of a job right now, it sucks right now. I don't mean to make light of that. I don't think it sucks as bad as it did in 2008. Mind you, this is something that is going to correct. When you look at the recruiting numbers over the last 3 years, the amount of engineers that were recruited into the big tech companies, so far, when I look at layoff numbers, it feels like we are correcting rather than going into sort of recessionary layoffs. Yes, it's awful if you're one of the people affected, but I do think that there's still active hiring. It's taking longer. If you're looking for a job today, it's going to take you longer than it would have taken a couple of years ago. Sure. But I do think the market is telling us there's still tons of demand for engineers.
There is, Cormac, and we're busy. There's plenty of hiring, not as much as last year, but there's still plenty of hiring going on.
And I think one thing that is going to be true, that as productivity of individual engineers goes up, I don't think that's going to mean that engineers are suddenly going to be making half the amount of money they were making before, because my experience so far with the generative tools is that you need to have a pretty good engineering brain to pilot those tools correctly. these tools will not make a sketchy engineer into a great engineer. What these tools they'll make a solid engineer into a much more productive engineer, but you need to be a solid engineer. You need to be reviewing everything gets created. You need to be, interacting with the tooling in such a way, steering it correctly in order to get to that right output. So it's an accelerator. It's not a replacement for your knowledge, though. I believe that's going to remain to be the case for a while. Again, I'm not going to say 5 years from now it definitely will be this or that, but certainly, I think 3 years. 3 years is a horizon I'm comfortable with, and I think in the next 3 years, it's not going to be that replacement. I'd like to be standing, at the cliff 3 years from now and looking at the next 3 years looks like. But what exists today, I think, is going to be an accelerator, and it's going to enable a number of organizations that currently look at the complexity and the cost of having a software operation, and they're saying, no, thank you. I think this tooling is going to create more flexibility for organizations to say, maybe, you know what, I think if we can do it at half the price we thought we could do it at, let's lean in and let's do it. So I'm excited. I think there's going to be a little bit of an explosion of opportunities for engineers, actually.
Cormac, let's create a top 5 because people love numbers. What are 5 things you would advise up and coming engineers one day want to be CTOs or current CTOs that could learn from someone like you? What are the top 5 you would 5 things you would recommend to them?
Well, I don't know. Let me start with number 1. Do something you love to do. Okay. Now, you already mentioned I started coding when I was 8. By the time I was 11, 12 years old, I loved coding, so that was figured out for me. But if you're in a computer science program and you're going to be the next generation of software engineer, it's a huge domain with lots of directions you can go. Make sure you are always challenging yourself. There's a little bit of when you're a junior engineer, there's a bit of a conflict in terms of if you want to impress your employer, you want to deliver on the business objective quickly and move on to the next challenge. And then, that's going to be business challenge number 2, business challenge number 3, business challenge number 4. And to do great jobs and impress your employer, you need to be moving quickly through all those challenges. If you focus only on that, it's going to be hard for you to turn into a great engineer long term. You need to be finding time to deepen your knowledge, to understand, okay, why are things working that way? Why don't they work this other way? What's going on, in these technologies I'm using? Let me learn some of the neighboring technologies that, I'm calling these APIs. I know they work. I don't know how they work. There's my magic line. Steve Yagi is a famous guy who used to work at Google and other places. And he had a great blog where he'd, have these posts, but he talked about, I think it was called Practical Magic, the one article that he wrote. And he basically said, every engineer in the world, from the laziest, scooting along just on top of APIs to somebody who sort of knows everything, every engineer in the world has magic lines. And for some people, that is, I'm coding some web experiences, I'm calling some APIs. The magic line is those APIs. I know that everything below that is just magic. I don't know how it works. It just does. And now I'm pulling it together. And often as a junior engineer, you're kind of operating at that level. And then there are some other, super deep engineers who have learned all the layers through the operating system. They've learned, how, garbage collection works, and they've learned how, UI frameworks work, how networking works, all these things. And, Steve Yagi, would talk about how at some point down at the microprocessor level, how transistors work were magic to him, so he goes pretty low. But the point is, everybody has a magic line, and you should always challenge yourself to push your magic line lower every year. Are you trying to deepen your sense of where that magic is? By the way, there's nothing wrong with starting out where your magic line is just that API you're calling. I mean, we all start there, but find time and find the interest to figure out what's going on underneath the covers. Muck around on the weekend or, whenever, to be able to play around and learn something about this domain. If you find time for yourself to understand those tools as a hobby more than how to get this current work task I have in front of me to get that done. That's going to benefit you. You are going to be the sort of engineer who will ultimately become a principal engineer and an architect, because when you've been doing that for 10 years, a lot of the pieces start gelling together, and you can spot patterns, broader patterns. You can figure out what's going on in a much broader architecture stack when you have that deeper knowledge. But if you're, like I say, if you're focusing on delighting your employer in your first job, in exclusivity, then you might sell yourself short.
Cormac, you know what? One thing that I noticed, you talked about why. When I asked you early on, hey, we need this project done in a month, and the first question you had is why. And then when we turned it around, we talked about an engineer, forget CTO or VP or director. You talked about the why, right? Because it sounds like if you love what you do, then you don't look at this as a 9 to 5 just so you can check boxes so you can eat. I feel like if that's what you're doing, you're in the wrong business and you're missing out on so much depth. They say that only 23% of employees are engaged, something like that, at work. Yeah. And as bad as that is for the employer, I think it's even worse for the individual, because we spend 1/3 or even upwards of half, if you don't count sleep, at work. So if you don't like what you do, I personally recommend getting out of it. And the reason I brought that up is because what you started with is do something you love, because then when you geek out on the weekend to go learn and deepen your knowledge, you don't feel like you're not living, right? Work-life balance. I'm working, so I'm not living. You're doing something you love, and you're getting deeper and deeper in your world. And when you do that, you just gain so much, right? People always, hey, you work so hard. And I'm like, yeah, because I love what I do. If I didn't, there are so many other ways to make money. I'm an entrepreneur. You know that, Cormac. I do real estate. I'm an advisor to companies and all these, but I love what I do. I love working with brilliant CTOs like yourself and brilliant engineers and my awesome team here. And so for me, it's never felt like work. And I work my ass off, but I enjoy it. So it doesn't feel like work. I read a book a week because I love it, not because someone assigns it to me. So I love this piece of advice. This is great.
I don't know very many people who I look at who have been very successful in life who don't love what they do, because it is so hard to devote the right kind of mental energy to a problem that you don't love. And I've been lucky. Software for me has always been fascinating. And so, I'm a night owl. So, kind of 10 p.m. to midnight, sometimes to 1 a.m. That's my time to sort of like to geek out. I still like doing lots of things that are out in the fresh air on the weekends. Yeah. I've just been sailing, actually, is my latest hobby. Wow. And that's been fun. So yeah, I mean, we all have to find our personal balance that makes sense to us, but I think it's really important that you are striving to deepen your knowledge. It's a very interesting time with generative AI tools, but for 40 years, software engineers have been making different business domains more and more productive. And I don't remember being part of a team. My career is not 40 years long, by the way, but it's not much short of that. But anyway, I don't remember being in a conversation where we'd be saying, I don't know if we should be doing this because it's going to make some other work domain too productive. No, making a domain more productive is amazing, right? And when we look at the unemployment numbers that we have today across the industry, across the Western world, certainly unemployment is low. And it just shows you that productivity gains benefits, more often than not, it benefits what creative things we can get up to as, an ecosystem. And that's why I think when it comes to generative AI, we need to look on this with optimism. I have never worked for a company that had too many engineers. I'm sure there are companies out there that exist, but invariably the problem is trying to figure out how to get more done. We've got this long, ambitious business roadmap. If only we had, an engineering org that was twice the size of our current one, but budgets are what they are. This is an opportunity to fuel some of that ambition. So I'm very optimistic about that.
Great news is if we all get replaced by AI, at least we could all become plumbers or roofers. I don't think anyone's doing that.
I think AI plumbers. That's going to be a long time coming. Yeah.
I'm going to look into it. I have a friend that owns a very successful plumbing company. Cormac, what you've added tremendous value, not to just me, but the world after this, hopefully. What is one thing we can, like, what are you up to these days? How can we add a little value to Cormac's world?
Well, I don't know. I'm actually enjoying life quite a lot. I recently left OpenTable, which was, it's a tough decision because OpenTable is an amazing place and the team is incredible there. But anyway, after 10 years, I've decided to move on, and I've been catching up with a lot of family and personal projects that I've been wanting to get to. So taking a breather. I'm starting to talk to companies now, so looking for my next opportunity. But I'm just interested in meeting a business that is solving an interesting problem for the customer. That's it.
There you go. Would you take on advisor roles, board roles, things like that?
I would. An opportunity to be able to stay in conversation in a number of different domains would be very appealing. So I'd be very interested in participating in that capacity.
There you go, folks. You heard it. You heard it live from Cormac himself. Cormac, you've been incredible. I appreciate you greatly. This has been so much fun. You and I needed to catch up anyway. We just happened to do it online, and hopefully I'll see you at the next CTO poker night.
Yeah, that'll be cool. Thanks very much, Avitas. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, brother. And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avitas Santoplian, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.